Welcome back, everyone, to another week of Ramban ala Parsha. This week we have the zchut to read two parshiot, Nitzavim-Vayelekh. Although we'll mostly be focused on Nitzavim, we'll hopefully do Ramban ala Vayelekh also, and maybe a special emphasis today on tshuva, not just because we're less than a week from Rosh Hashanah, but also because this is the week in which the Ramban discusses it in the Parsha, and there are many, many fascinating ideas relating to that. But let's start with a simple point. The first pasuk in the Parsha says the Torah, Atem nitzavim hayom kulechem lifnei Adonai Elohechem, Roshechem, Shiftechem, Ziknechem, V'shotrechem, Kol Ish Yisrael. Right? You're standing literally nitzavim. You're standing in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And the Ramban, not surprisingly, is bothered. It's the unstated question, but he wants to know, what is that? We're standing in front of God all the time. What does it mean to stand in front of God when we live our lives in front of God and we live our lives in God's presence? So says the Ramban, Ta'am atem nitzavim hayom kulchem lifnei Hashem Elokechem she'atem omdim u'mezumanim lifnei Hashem kidei la'amod bibrito ki lekabel haTorah bebi'ura ne'esfu elav. Says the Ramban, this isn't stam. You happen to be standing in front of God. Yes, it's true. You stand in front of God your entire lives. But here we're doing it for a purpose. And the Ramban is reminding us at the end of Sefer Dvarim is the Brit Arvot Moav. We're entering into a new covenant with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So we're not just standing in God's presence. We're about to enter into a covenant with God. La'avrecha b'brit Hashem Elokechu v'alato. Right? We're going to enter into a Brit with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Now, the Ramban also recognizes what the Ibn Ezra says. Oh, shehayu omdim lifnei ha'aron. It could be that literally, if you see the Aron as a representative of God's Gilu Shechina in the world, okay, so they were standing in front of the Aron. But I think the bigger idea in the Ramban is that they're not standing there, just standing there, they're standing there for the purpose. And the purpose for which they're standing there is to enter into a new covenant with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And to emphasize the point, says the Ramban, V'yitachen shekarat od imam brit ki brit harishona asher karat itam b'Har Sinai. Now, how did the Jewish people enter into the Brit at Har Sinai? Shehikriv alehem olah, right? They brought a carbon. V'lakach chatzi adam lizrok al hamizbeach v'chatzi adam zarak al ha'am. Right, and there was a ceremony of the spilling of the blood. Aval says, okay, so why is it not in the Torah here? So says the Ramban, Aval lo hutzrach la'azkir zeh. It could be that we got the idea already from Sefer Shmot that this is how you enter into a covenant with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, with haza'ah and zrikas damim, and therefore the Torah didn't have to tell us this here. But the Ramban is emphasizing that Bnei Yisrael are about to enter into a Na'aseh v'nishma moment. Bnei Yisrael are about to do something significant. And here I think that the deeper point in the Ramban, and something we all recognize, is that yes, we live our lives in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and we try to live our lives in His presence, and we try to be aware of His presence. But there's a difference. You know, if you're on the Makam HaMikdash, so the Torah doesn't have to tell you not to eat treif, not to speak Lashon Hara. You're standing literally in God's home. Right? If you're in Yerushalayim, I think people who have this chus to live in Yerushalayim, it's hard to sin. It should be harder to sin. There's a difference. Yes, wherever we live, we stand in front of God. But there's a difference between Chutz La'aretz and Eretz Yisrael, and there's a difference between Eretz Yisrael and Yerushalayim, and there's a difference between Yerushalayim and the Makam HaMikdash, right? There are levels of Kiddusha, and there are levels of Nitzavim Lifnei Hashem Elokechem. And says the Ramban, yes, normally, the Jewish people are standing in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but when you're doing it for the purpose of entering into a new covenant, that's a much more pronounced Nitzavim Lifnei Hashem. We're much more aware of the fact that we're standing in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And if I could add, the tshuva process, which is all around us now has to do with Nitzavim Lifnei Hashem. When we're aware that we're operating and that we're in God's presence, we're much better people. We're much better Jews. And the key is to know that you're Nitzavim Lifnei Hashem at all times. And the more that we know that, the better we'll be. Okay, that's the first Ramban on the Parsha. Now, in Pasuk Chav Hey, the Torah continues, and there's a lot of warnings about Avodah Zarah, and there's a lot of predictions for the future, and this is the sad prediction, right? It's going to be bad. We're going to sin. Vayelchu vayavdu Elohim acharim vayishtachavu lahem Elohim asher lo yidaum v'lo chalak lahem. What does it mean, Elohim asher lo yidaum? Of course we do know them. They're fake gods. So here I think the Ramban is conveying for us what HaKadosh Baruch Hu is really bothered by. Says the Ramban, V'lo yadu bahem givurot elokut, v'lo chalak lahem, v'lo nitanam lechelkam. God didn't, the Ramban thinks that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave certain powers to malachim, to mazalot, to other entities, to the sun and the moon. They answer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But with respect to the Jewish people, no. HaKadosh Baruch Hu never assigned these responsibilities to other powers. Okay, v'unkelos tirgumo v'lo otiv lahon lo heitiv lahem shum tova. These gods, so to speak, never did any good thing for us. V'lashon chalak oto eloka shebicharo lahem lo chalak lahem shum nachal v'chelek. Okay, both of those are quoted in Rashi. Now says the Ramban, it's similar but slightly different. V'hanachon Elohim asher lo yidaum kelohim. There are other things, but we don't know them as gods. Klomar shelo yadu otam b'koach elokut sheyimtza lahem me'atzmam. We never saw them. They never did any godlike things for us. There's no reason to assume that they have godlike qualities. V'lo chelkam Hashem elokei avotam lahem. Yes. Says the Ramban, God did put a malach in charge of Spain, and in charge of Italy, and in charge of Rome, but not in charge of the Jews. Shelo natanotam sarim al Yisrael kasher samam al shel ha'umot. Yes, God put malachim and other powers in charge of the Gentiles, but not in front of us, not in charge of us. And here you get the sense in the Ramban that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is pained by this. Okay, if there was such a thing as some other God who did good things for you, maybe I could understand it, but there's no reason. Why would anybody why would a Jew worship Avodah Zarah? They're not godlike. They never did anything for you. They never promised you anything. There's no reason to do it. And the sense you get in the Ramban is that like HaKadosh Baruch Hu is like pained by the fact, not just the terrible sin of Avodah Zarah, but the terrible sin of Avodah Zarah for no reason. Right? There's simply no justification for it. And that seems to hurt HaKadosh Baruch Hu even more. Okay, now we come to a very significant Ramban. The Torah is describing the process not just of tshuva, but of the future, where things are going to happen for a certain reason. And says the Torah, right? V'hayaki yavo alecha kol advarim ha'ela habracha v'haklala asher natat l'fanecha v'hashevota levavecha b'chol hagoyim asher hidichacha Hashem lokecha shama. When these bad things happen to you, says the Torah, you're going to do tshuva. V'shavta Hashem lokecha v'shamata b'kolo. Right? You're going to return to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Kol asher anochi mitzavcha hayom ata uvanecha ub'chol levavecha v'chol nafshecha. And then God will return to you. V'shav Hashem lokecha shvutcha v'richamecha. V'shaviki be'atzcha mikol hamim asher fitzcha shama shama. Okay, skipping a pasuk. Umal Hashem Elokecha et levavcha ve'et levav zarecha li'ahava es Hashem Elokecha b'chol levavcha v'chol nafshecha l'man chayecha. And literally, God will circumcise your heart. So it can't be that that's what it means. But shockingly, the Ramban thinks that it means something close to that, if not actually physically, metaphysically. And says the Ramban, Umal Hashem Elokecha et levavcha zeu shamru ba litaher misainoto. Mavtichacha shetashuv elav b'chol levavcha v'hu ya'azor otcha. It's not just a promise that in the future you're going to do tshuva. It's a promise that in the future when you do tshuva, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to help us. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to help you. V'nireh min haktuvim inyan zeh she'omer ki mizman habriya hayta reshut. Now, a little background. The Ramban, like other Rishonim, believes in schar va'onesh. Right? If we do good, we'll be rewarded. If we make the wrong choices, we'll be punished. But that's just so that you can have bechira chafshis. Those are the two principles upon which the world is built. Without free will, God can never reward us and God can never punish us. right? And if God didn't reward us or punish us, then there would be no free will. So says the Ramban, Ki mizman habriya hayta reshut biyad hadam lasod kirtzonot tzaddik o rasha. Right? We were given free choice. We were given free will when God created the world. V'chol zman haTorah kain, and the entirety of this world that we live in, that's the case. Why? Kidei sheyeh lahem zchut b'bchiratam batov va'onesh b'ritzotam bara, so that God could reward us when we do good things and punish us when we do poor things. Now, unbelievably, says Ramban, Aval, limot HaMoshiach, tihiyeh ha'bechira b'tov lahem teva. Lo yit'avel lahem halev lema she'eino ra'ui, v'lo yachpotz bo klal. Says the Ramban, Pshat the pasuk is that in the future world, in HaMoshiach, our natural instincts will be to do good. We're not going to have the same bechira we have now, because we will naturally be the kind of person who want to do what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants us to do. V'hi hamilah nizkeret kan. Ki hachemda v'hata'ava or la lalev. Right? Umal Hashem Elokecha, God will circumcise. What do you circumcise? You circumcise an orla. Says the Ramban, the desire to do wrong, the desire for physical pleasure, they're not the lave, they're the arla. They're what we grow. They're the covering for the lave. Elokai neshama shenatata bi tahurahi. The neshama that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us was a pure neshama. We grew the arla on our own. Umal halevhu shelo yachmod v'lo yitaveh. Says the Ramban, la'asid lavo, the purpose of Yemos HaMashiach is that our hearts will change back to what they were originally. Before the original sin of Adam HaRishon, we won't desire things. We won't have overwhelming urges. We'll be better people. V'yashuv ha'adam bizman hahu la'asher haya kodem cheto shel Adam HaRishon. And we will return to the status that we had before the sin of Adam HaRishon. It's a very beautiful idea, and it's very moshechet halev. It's very compelling, except for one thing. Right? Adam HaRishon sinned. If HaKadosh Baruch Hu made Adam HaRishon without urges, without desires, so why did he eat from the Eitz Hadas? Right? That's a strong question on the Ramban. And there are answers to it. We're not going to go into it now. There are answers to it. But the fact of the matter is, says the Ramban, Umal Hashem Elokecha ad levavcha, the world is going to change. Limot HaMashiach, we're going to lose on some level our Yetzer Hara. Our desire, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu commands us to do something, it won't be a decision. We have to think about what. No, we'll want to do it. Our instinct will be to do it. Our nature will be to do it. We'll be happy to do it. And therefore, there's the downside. I'm skipping to the very end of the Ramban. Ulefikach ein bahem lo zechut v'lo chova. See, the problem is, if schar va'onesh is tied directly to bechira chavshis, and the Ramban thinks without a doubt it is, that's a problem. Because if you don't have real bechira chavshis, so then God can't reward and He can't punish. And then the whole motivation and the whole desire, it's a different world. In the world that we live in, most of us want to be rewarded. I'm not saying that's the sole reason, even that's the main reason we do mitzvahs and we worship HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but we believe that we're going to be rewarded. When the time comes where that's our instinct, and we don't have to overcome our Yetzer Hara, and we don't have to overcome petty jealousies and all the things that motivate us, then what? What are we left with if we're not going to be rewarded and we're not going to be punished? It's almost like, the Ramchal talks about, many people talk about this, that Olam Haba, you can't do mitzvahs anymore. Olam Haba, wherever you finish in this world, that's where you are for eternity in the world to come. And there's no making that better and there's no making that worse, because you're not going to sin and you're not going to do mitzvahs. because they don't apply at that time. So Ramban says that's going to happen Limos HaMashiach. The good news is that we're going to all be tzaddikim, and our instinct is going to be to do good. Now, it could be, and maybe this is also buried in the Ramban, that it's just an instinct. It doesn't guarantee anything. And if you really want to be bad, you can still be bad. And maybe that's the question, that's the answer to Adam HaRishon, right? His instinct was to do good. That's how God created him. But you can overcome that instinct. There is still some bechira chavshis, even when our natural instinct is to do good. Okay. That's that fascinating Ramban. And now we come to the main point of tshuva and a slight introduction. The question is tshuva a mitzvah? Right? That kind of obsesses us in Elul, and all tshuva drashas and all ideas are relating to that. Right? And the Rambam doesn't explicitly say that it's a mitzvah, but the Rav explains how he means it's a mitzvah, and that's what most of us believe. And that's something I used to think was great. I wanted tshuva to be a mitzvah. I wanted to think I'm doing a mitzvah when I do tshuva. But recently I've sort of rethought it. Because what happens, let's take an easy example, right? You get up in the middle of the night on Friday night, and you go to the bathroom, and you go back to bed. And on your way out of the bathroom, you shut the light. Right? That's Chilul Shabbos b'shogeg. Right? You didn't do it on purpose. It was a mistake. But you should have known it was Shabbos, and there is what to do tshuva for, and you have to bring a chatas, bizman shebeis hamikdash kaim, etc. Now, if tshuva is a mitzvah, so great. When you do tshuva, you get a mitzvah, and you wipe out your avera, so to speak, and you're back to where you started from, or you're even better because you got schar for a mitzvah. But what if you didn't? Right? Do you now get like a double word negative? Well, I'm punished once because I was mechal Shabbos b'shogeg, and now I'm punished again because I didn't do tshuva that I was chayiv to do when I was mechal Shabbos b'shogeg. Right? That kind of bothers me a little bit, and that makes it difficult. On the other hand, I think our instincts really are that tshuva is too important to be left to us, and tshuva is a mitzvah. Okay? Now, most people, and I think they're right when they say the Ramban thinks that tshuva is a mitzvah. But the more I read the next Ramban, the more I think that's right, but I think it's not the whole story. Says the Ramban in Pasuk Yud Aleph, Ki ha-mitzvah hazot asher anochi mitzavecha hayom lo nifleiti mimcha v'lo rechakahi. This mitzvah is not distance from you. Lo b'shamayim hi lemor mi'ala lanu hashamayim v'yikachel lanu v'yashminu otov v'nasena v'lo me'ever layam hi lemor mi'avor lanu et ever hayam v'yikachel lanu v'yashminu otov v'nasena ki karov elecha hadavar ma'od b'ficha uvilvavecha la'asoto. Now let's read the Ramban. Ki ha-mitzvah hazot. So he says the simple pshat is al kol Torah kula, right? We're at the end of the Torah now, and the Torah is saying, everything I've given you, you should keep. However, v'hanachon, says the Ramban, ki al kol ha-Torah yomar kol ha-mitzvah shanochim mitzavcha yom, not ha-mitzvah hazot. Aval ha-mitzvah hazot al ha-tshuva ha-nizkeret. Says the Ramban, no. Ki ha-mitzvah hazot is talking about Vishavta Hashem Elokecha v'shamato b'kolo. It's talking about the mitzvah that was just described in the Torah, and that mitzvah is tshuva. Ki v'hashevota levavecha vishavta Hashem Elokecha mitzvah sheyitzaveh otanu la'asod kein. Right? It's a mitzvah. We're commanded to do tshuva if we do something wrong. Well, so why is it slightly unclear? Why doesn't it just say do tshuva b'lashon tzivui? So he says v'ne'emra bilshon habeinoni lirmoz b'haftacha ki atid hadavar liot kein. The Ramban says it doesn't read as a commandment. It doesn't read as an imperative, because the Torah is trying. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is trying to tell us something else also. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is trying to tell us it's really easy. You just have to want to do it. And I'm here to accept your tshuva. Right? So it's not really, the idea of a mitzvah makes sense. But you don't really find keep Shabbos. Oh, and Shabbos is the easiest thing in the world to do. Lo ba shamayim hi, right? V'lo me'ever layam hi. Ki karov elecha hadavar ma'od b'ficho v'lvavcha lasoto. We don't find that kind of encouragement with respect to other mitzvahs. So I think the Ramban was walking a fine line here. He's saying, on the one hand, tshuva is a mitzvah. On the other hand, tshuva is the easiest thing in the world, and God is trying to encourage us to do tshuva. And let's read on. V'hatam lomar, ki im yihiyeni dachacha b'tzei hashamayim, no matter how much HaKadosh Baruch Hu disperses us to the four corners of the earth. V'ata biyad ha'amim, and you're under the thumb of Christians, of Muslims, of all, tuchal lashuva l'Hashem v'lasod k'chol asher anochi mitzavcha hayom. It doesn't matter. No matter how bad it is, says HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you can do tshuva. Ki ein hadavar nifla v'rachok mimcha. It's not distant from us. Aval karov eilecha ma'od la'asoto b'chol leitu v'chol makom. No matter where you are, no matter what circumstance you're in, says HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you can do tshuva. And the good news is when HaKadosh Baruch Hu says this, it's slightly different than Shabbos. It's slightly different than Kashrus. It's slightly different than other mitzvahs, because the effectiveness of tshuva is totally in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Right? When I keep Shabbos, I kept Shabbos. I know the rules. I keep Shabbos. I did it. I know the rules of Kashrus. When I keep Kashrus, I did it. But tshuva is dependent on HaKadosh Baruch Hu accepting our repentance. And so HaKadosh Baruch Hu is basically begging us. He's saying, I'm here. I'm ready. It's easy. Just do it. V'zeh tam b'ficha u'bilvavcha la'asoto. Sheyitvadu et avonam ve'et avon avotam b'fihem. They have to confess in their mouths out loud. V'yashuvu b'libam el Hashem. V'yikablu alehem hayom haTorah la'asoto l'dorot. And they'll accept, do the Torah, to observe the Torah forever. So on the one hand, you can't deny. The Ramban says tshuva is a mitzvah. But the Ramban also acknowledges that it's presented in the Torah in some way less than an imperative. Because the focus of the parsha is to encourage us, is to tell us how easy it is. And so HaKadosh Baruch Hu presents it as a mitzvah, but it's a mitzvah that's so easy to do. And I think the idea that it's a mitzvah, but it doesn't really qualify as other mitzvahs do. I think the Ramban is not masig in the Sefer HaMitzvos of the Rambam. The Ramban doesn't say, hey, you forgot the mitzvah of tshuva. The Ramban himself does not count the mitzvah of tshuva. So I think, yes, he thinks it's an imperative, but it's not presented that way in the Torah. It's presented like in the Torah as kind of a gift. And that's pretty compelling to me, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells us, I really, really want you to do tshuva. Is it a mitzvah? Do you get schar? And are you punished if you don't do it? Hard to tell in the Ramban. The sense you get is what matters is to do tshuva. And obviously, you can't be a Jew, you can't be religious, you can't be observant if you don't believe in the power of tshuva. And whether you believe in it as one of the Taryag mitzvahs, or you believe in it as a gift that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us, I don't think it matters much. I don't think it matters much for the Ramban. I don't think it matters much for the Rambam. I think the point is, if you did something wrong, you just feel bad about it, and you want God to forgive you, and that is a mitzvah, even if it's not a real mitzvah. Okay. Let's keep going. Next Ramban, and it's a similar theme. Re'eh, says the Pasuk Tedvav, Re'eh natati lefanecha hayom et hachayim ve'et hatov ve'et hamavet ve'et hara. So what's pshat in that Pasuk? Chayim and tov, mavet and ra. Says the Ramban, Yachzor lahazhirem od, lahagid lahem, ki shnei hadrachim biyadam ubirshutam lalechet ba'asher yechfetzu ba. Right? The Pasuk is telling us, you have bechira chapshis. You can choose chayim and tov. You can choose mavet and ra. Ve'ein monea ume'akev biyadam lo min ha'tachtonim v'lo min ha'elyonim. And the world that God created, there's no pressure on you. There's no force. There's no one telling you have to do good, don't do wrong. V'ya'id b'hem et hashamayim ve'et haaretz pam shenit. And the pasuk says it over and over again. Achar shamar ha'idoti bachem hayom et hashamayim ve'et haaretz ki avod tov edun maher. Ki ata yomar ha'idoti bachem hayom et hashamayim ve'et haaretz ki achayim v'hamavet natati lefanecha. Shehem habracha v'haklala. The Ramban says chayim equals bracha, mavet equals klala. V'chi ya'atzticha shetibocher b'chayim leman tichya tov zarecha. Right? HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not just telling us the fact. He's essentially asking us, he's pleading with us, please be good. Please choose life. It's like Rashi on the pasuk says, right? When a king takes his son out to the fields and he says, choose a good field for your inheritance, and he puts him in the good field, he wants him to choose correctly, but he can't choose for him. That's how HaKadosh Baruch Hu made the world. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not going to impose yiras shamayim on us, right? That's the Gemara. Kol bidei shamayim chutz miyiras shamayim. God doesn't do that. But he comes so close here by begging us, by pleading with us, please, I want you to do tshuva. Please, I want you to choose well. V'hineu kimachtim ha'edim b'sof devarav kulam. It's as if HaKadosh Baruch Hu is calling on witnesses at the end of this section of the Torah when we're going to enter the covenant of Avot Moav. He wants to call witnesses. The Hashamayim v'aretz, like at Hazinu Hashamayim v'aretz, they're witnesses. He wants to call witnesses to tell us this is what we should do, this is what matters, this is what God wants. Okay, very quickly. Last Ramban, we'll go on to Vayelekh, and the pasuk there says, pasuk Yud Gimel, when the Torah, for reasons we're not going to discuss today, introduces the once every 7-year mitzvah of Hakel. So the Torah says, Tikrat ha-Torah zot neged kol Yisrael ba'ozneim hakel et ha'am ha'anashim ve'hanashim ve'hataf v'gercha asher b'sharecha leman yishma'u u'leman yilmedu v'yara'u es Adonai Elohechem v'shamru la'asot et kol dirat Torah zot. Okay? The Ramban is going to focus on what Chazal focus on, the different categories. And here the Ramban says something fascinating. Leman yishma'u u'leman yilmedu ha'anashim ve'hanashim ki gam hein shomot v'lomdot liyirat Hashem. Says the Ramban, unlike the Medrash, right? The Medrash that we all know that's quoted in Rashi, Leman yishma'u, u'leman yilmedu, that the women come to hear and the men come to learn. But the Ramban says it slightly differently. The Ramban says both men and women come, because even the women have a chiyuv in yiras shamayim. And that's the purpose of Hakel, right? It's not just to learn Torah. It's the experience of being there. And perhaps the Ramban would say, I don't want to put words in his mouth, perhaps the Ramban would say that if you learn Torah, it's true, women don't have the quote-unquote mitzvah of Talmud Torah. But so long as what they're learning is increasing their yiras shamayim, then that's the mitzvah of yiras shamayim. And the Ramban here goes out of his way to point out that both the men and the women share in this mitzvah. And both the men and the women share in the mitzvah of Hakel in an active way. To say it's not just that the men learn and the women listen, it's that so long as the women listen in a way that's going to increase their yiras shamayim, that's part of the mitzvah. And just to make it clear, the Ramban knows the Medrash because he says, Aval Rabotenu amru ha'anashim lilmod v'hanashim lishmoa v'ataf lamaba litain tzachal mivehen. So the Ramban is trying to not disagree with Chazal, but he has a different take on it. And he's saying men and women together can increase the yiras shamayim through Hakel. Okay, so what we saw today was on Nitzavim. Yes, we live our lives standing in front of God. Nevertheless, there are times of more of awareness and less of awareness. And here, when you're about to enter into a covenant, there's more awareness. Elokim ashalo yida'um. God is hurt that you would worship not just fake gods, but gods that never did anything for you. Umal Hashem Elokecha. HaKadosh Baruch Hu la'asid lavo is going to change human nature, right? We'll lose schar va'onesh, but we'll also lose the urge to sin. That's a fascinating topic. Ki ha-mitzvah zot. The idea that there is a mitzvah of tshuva But more importantly, God wants us to do tshuva. God begs us to do tshuva. God pleads with us to do tshuva. And then the last point in Hakel, that men and women share equally in the mitzvah. Okay, yashkach to everybody. Have a great, great week. I'm not sure about next week. So if we don't have next week, k'tiva v'chatima tova to you, to all of us, to Klal Yisrael, and besoros tovos.